She was 31 years old, wearing plain scrubs, standing alone in a hospital corridor, while a uniformed officer screamed in her face. He had a badge. He had rank. He had 3 colleagues behind him and a chief administrator nodding along from 20 feet away. She had nothing. No backup, no title, no one willing to step forward and say a single word on her behalf. Officer Wade Harlan pointed his finger 2 inches from her nose and told her she was finished, that her license was gone, that she should pack her locker and disappear before he made things worse. Every person in that hallway watched. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. What Wade Harlan didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the woman standing quietly in front of him had once kept 7 special operations soldiers alive in a collapsed building under enemy fire. And some of those soldiers were about to walk through the front doors of Harlan General Hospital. If this story already has you gripped, hit that follow button, give it a like, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The morning started the way most mornings at Harlan General did, badly and without warning. Maya Reeves had been on since 6 a.m., which meant she'd already been on her feet for 4 hours before most of the day shift nurses had finished their first cup of coffee. She didn't mind the early hours. She'd worked stranger schedules in stranger places, and a Level 2 trauma center in Calverton, Ohio was nothing compared to some of the environments she'd operated in before. The noise was familiar. Monitors, PA announcements, the particular screech of gurney wheels on polished linoleum, and the chaos had a rhythm she could read without thinking. She was in Bay 7 checking a post-op patient's drainage output when she heard raised voices from the admissions corridor. Not the ordinary kind of raised voices. Not a frightened family member or a drunk arguing with the front desk. This was a different register entirely. The flat, aggressive confidence of someone who believed the volume of their voice entitled them to whatever they wanted. Maya finished logging the drainage numbers, noted the time, and walked toward the sound. The admissions corridor connected the ER waiting area to the triage stations, and it was almost always crowded in the morning. Today was no different. A cluster of people had formed near the intake desk. Nurses, an orderly, 2 residents who looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. All of them arranged in a loose half circle with their eyes pointed at the floor. In the center of the corridor stood Officer Wade Harlan. Maya had seen him before. Most of the nursing staff had. He worked with the Calverton Police Department's Community Liaison Division, which in practice meant he showed up at the hospital whenever someone in police custody needed medical clearance, and he treated the ER like a precinct annex he personally ran. He was broad-shouldered and loud, and carried himself with the particular ease of a man who had never once experienced a consequence for his behavior. He wore his uniform like armor. He spoke to hospital staff like they were support personnel assigned to him specifically. Right now he was standing over a patient. The patient was a man in his mid-40s, sitting on a plastic chair near the intake desk with his wrists zip-tied together and his left eye swollen nearly shut. He was wearing a torn jacket, and his breathing was labored, shallow, fast, with a slight catch on the inhale that Maya clocked from 15 feet away. Standing between Officer Harlan and the patient was a nurse named Priya Okafor. Priya was 26, 2 years out of school, and she was not the kind of person who usually put herself in front of someone like Wade Harlan. Her hands were shaking slightly. But she was standing there anyway, chart in hand, and she was not moving. "Sir, this patient needs to be assessed before you transport him," Priya was saying, her voice careful and precise. "His respiratory pattern is irregular and his vitals haven't been cleared. I can't authorize release until—" "I didn't ask for your authorization," Harlan said. "He's a detainee. He goes when I say he goes. He's a patient in this facility. While he's here, he is here because I brought him here for a scratch on his head, not because he's sick." Harlan stepped closer. Not aggressive enough to be undeniable, but close enough to make the point. "You're wasting my time." Priya didn't step back. "His lung sounds are diminished on the left side. That could indicate you need to mind your business." Harlan turned to the administrator standing near the corridor entrance, a man named Director Callum Burke, who oversaw ER operations and spent most of his time trying to maintain what he called positive relationships with city partners. Burke was already nodding before Harlan even looked at him. Maya had seen enough. She walked forward through the edge of the crowd, not fast, not dramatically. She moved the way she always moved in a clinical emergency, with purpose. and without wasted motion. "Excuse me," she said. Harlan turned. He looked her over once. Her scrubs were plain. Her badge said Reeves, M.R.N. Her expression was calm. "This patient," Maya said, addressing no one in particular and everyone at once, "needs a chest film and a pulse ox reading before anyone takes him anywhere. His breathing pattern is consistent with a pneumothorax. If he goes without imaging and he collapses in a transport vehicle, we're looking at a preventable fatality." Harlan stared at her. "Who are you?" "Maya Reeves, charge nurse, Bay 4 through 8. "Then go back to Bay 4 through 8, not through 8. "I can't do that right now." The corridor went very quiet. Quiet in the specific way that happens when everyone in a room simultaneously decides not to be involved. Harlan took a step toward her. He was a large man, and he used size deliberately, positioning himself at angles that made people feel crowded, even before he said anything. Maya didn't move. She stood where she was, her feet slightly apart, her posture loose. She kept her eyes on his. "You're telling me," he said, low and slow, "that you're going to hold up a lawful police transport because of a hunch. I'm telling you that legally, this patient has the right to medical assessment before transport, and I'm documenting that you were advised of a potential tension pneumo before removal. If you want to override that, I need it in writing with your badge number, your supervisor's name, and the time of the order." Something moved across Harlan's face. Not anger, that was already there. Something colder. "Get Director Burke," he said. "I'm right here, Wade," Burke said from behind the crowd. "Tell this nurse what her role is in this facility." Burke stepped forward, adjusting his lanyard, smoothing the front of his blazer. He was a careful man. Careful in the way that looked like professionalism until you understood it was just self-preservation. "Nurse Reeves," he said, "perhaps we can let Officer Harlan proceed and conduct a secondary assessment once." "There's no standard of care that works that way," Maya said, still not raising her voice. "Secondary assessment after transport for a potential pneumo is not a thing." Burke's jaw tightened. "Maya, document it then." She looked at him directly. "If you're overriding a nursing clinical concern on a patient with compromised respirations, I need that documented. Today." Burke said nothing. Harlan had been watching this exchange. He turned back to Maya, and this time his voice dropped to something that was almost conversational, which was somehow worse. "You know what I think?" he said. "I think you've got a real problem with authority. I think you've been here long enough to forget that this hospital operates on relationships with this city, relationships that people like you can damage." He paused. "I'm going to be making a call this afternoon to the Ohio Nursing Board. I'm going to tell them I witnessed reckless interference with a lawful police procedure by a charge nurse who obstructed patient transport and created a hostile environment for officers performing their duties." Priya made a small sound. One of the residents shifted their weight. Maya looked at Harlan for a moment. Then she looked at the patient, who was sitting very still in his plastic chair, watching everything with his one good eye. "What's your name?" she asked him. The man blinked. "Marcus," he said. His voice was rough, like breathing hurt. "Marcus Delaney." "Marcus, I need you to take a slow breath and tell me if you feel any pain in your chest." "Ma'am, don't," Harlan started. "Sharp," Delaney said. "Left side. Been getting worse." Maya turned back to Harlan. "I'm ordering a stat chest x-ray and pulse oximetry. You can stand in this hallway and watch, or you can wait in the ER lobby. Either way, this man does not leave this facility until I clear him." For 3 seconds, Harlan didn't move. Then he turned to Burke. "Get her out of here." Burke's face had gone careful in a new way. The way a man looks when he's calculating which side of a line has less cost. He cleared his throat. "Nurse Reeves, I think it would be best if you return to your assigned bays and let one of the other nurses handle the intake assessment." Maya looked at him. "You're pulling me from the patient. I'm redirecting your assignment. In the middle of a clinical assessment. The situation is documented," she said. She pulled out her personal notepad, small, battered, the kind nurses carry in their breast pockets, and wrote the time, the patient's name, the clinical finding, and the word redirected with Burke's name next to it. She did it in plain view of everyone in the corridor. Then she put the notepad back, looked at Priya, and said quietly, "Get the film. Document everything, every single thing." Priya gave a small, precise nod. Maya walked back down the corridor toward Base 7, and she was aware, without looking, that Harlan was watching her the entire way. Bush. She found out 2 hours later that Marcus Delaney had been transported without imaging. She found out from Priya, who appeared at the door of the supply room where Maya was doing inventory, her face tight and her eyes bright with the particular brightness of someone who has been trying not to cry for a while. "They took him," Priya said. Maya set down the saline bag she was holding. "What did Burke say?" "He said Harlan agreed to have him assessed at the detention facility." Priya exhaled. "He also said, he told me that you're being written up for creating a confrontational environment and interfering with law enforcement. He said it'll go in your personnel file." Maya was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Okay?" Priya stared at her. "Maya, a write-up in your file is, I know what it is. Harlan called someone. I heard him on the phone in the hall. He mentioned the nursing board, like he said he would." Priya's voice was unsteady. "I'm worried he's actually going to do something." Maya looked at her for a moment. Priya was good. She was careful, and she was principled, and she'd stood in front of a large, angry man with a badge because it was the right thing to do, which was more than most people managed. "You did exactly right this morning," Maya said. "What you did, standing there, holding that chart, that mattered. Don't let anyone tell you it didn't." Priya looked at the floor. "It didn't help him." "Not yet," Maya said. She picked up the saline bag and went back to inventory. The write-up appeared in her file by noon. Burke delivered it personally, which she suspected was his way of demonstrating that he wasn't hiding from the decision. He sat across from her in the small office behind the nursing station, the page between them on the desk, and he spoke in the measured cadence of a man reciting a speech he'd prepared. The language was careful. It described a pattern of confrontational behavior, a failure to follow chain-of-command protocols, and conduct unbecoming of a charged nurse in a collaborative clinical environment. It did not mention Marcus Delaney by name. It did not mention the clinical assessment she had attempted to complete or the respiratory findings she had documented. She read the whole thing. Burke watched her read it. "I want to note," she said when she finished, "that this document contains no reference to the clinical concern I raised. The clinical concern was addressed by the receiving facility." "Was it?" "That's my understanding." "Your understanding," she said, "not a confirmed outcome." Burke folded his hands on the desk. "Maya, I understand you feel strongly about this, but the hospital has to maintain functioning relationships with city agencies. That means there are moments where we need our clinical staff to exercise judgment about when to let a patient with a potential tension pneumo get transported without a chest film because a police officer wants to leave." Burke's eyes went flat. "I'm asking you to sign the acknowledgement." She picked up the pen. She signed it. Then she pulled her notepad from her pocket, wrote the date and time and the phrase "signed under protest." Clinical concerns omitted from document, and held it up so he could see it clearly. "I'm keeping a copy of my own," she said. Burke stood up. "You should be aware that Officer Harlan has indicated this may not be the end of the matter." "I'm aware. He has relationships in this city that extend beyond the police department." She looked at Burke evenly. "So do I," she said. Burke left. She sat in the office alone for 2 minutes, then went back to work. Awesome. She was in the middle of a blood transfusion management on a patient in Base 6 when her phone buzzed with a text from a number she hadn't seen in 14 months. "Heard you're at Harlan General. We're nearby. You need anything?" The sender was listed in her phone as T. Voss. She finished the transfusion notes, checked her patient, and stepped into the hallway. She typed back, "Not yet." "How many of you?" The reply came in under a minute. 4. "Breck's with us." She stared at the name for a moment. "Don't come in," she typed. "I'll let you know." She put her phone in her pocket and went back to work. By 3 in the afternoon, she'd heard from 2 different nurses that Harlan had been back in the hospital. Not in an official capacity, just walking the halls, talking to people. The way someone walks through a space they want to make sure knows they own it. She was documenting at a workstation near the nursing station when he appeared. He wasn't in uniform this time. He was in street clothes, dark jacket, no badge visible, which somehow made it worse. Official Harlan was hostile but bounded. Unofficial Harlan felt different. He walked up to the workstation and stood beside her without speaking for a moment. "I talked to the nursing board this afternoon," he said. She kept typing. "They're going to open a review," he said. "Could take a while, could be nothing, could be—" He paused. "A lot of trouble for a nurse with your kind of file." She finished the notation she was on and looked up at him. "What kind of file?" she said. "The kind that raises questions. About judgment. About pattern of behavior." He said it like he was reading from a document, which meant he'd already spoken to someone who'd told him what was in her personnel record. "You've had 2 other incidents, a disagreement with a supervising physician at Morrow Valley, a complaint filed by a transport contractor at—" "Both incidents were reviewed and closed without finding," she said. "That's also in the file. Reviews can be reopened when new information surfaces." She looked at him. He looked back at her. Up close, she could see the particular texture of his confidence, not the ordinary kind that comes from competence, but the kind that comes from having operated in a system where the people around him kept making way. It was a specific type of assurance that depended entirely on other people shrinking. "What do you want, Officer Harlan?" she said. "I want you to understand the situation," he said. "You made things complicated this morning. You put me in a position I shouldn't have been in. And now there are people who are going to look very closely at your career, and I think when they do, they're going to find some things that make your future here very uncertain." "I see. I'm giving you a chance to make a different choice." "What choice is that?" "Resign," he said. Not angry now. Almost friendly. "Submit a letter to Burke today. Cite personal reasons, transition to a different field, whatever you want. I stopped the board inquiry. Nobody looks too hard at anything. You just go." The nursing station was busy around them, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, people moving through. A pair of nurses 30 feet away were working through a medication reconciliation. Nobody was paying attention to this particular conversation. Maya looked at Harlan for a long moment. "No," she said, and went back to typing. Something passed across his face that was harder to read than anger, not shock. Men like Harlan were rarely shocked by refusal, because refusal just became a different kind of obstacle to move through. But something changed in his expression, a calculation completed. "You should think carefully," he said. "I have," she said. He left. She finished her documentation, sent it, and sat for a moment looking at the screen. Then she picked up her phone and typed to T. Voss. "Where are you parked?" "Nit." She met them in the parking structure across from the hospital's east entrance, on the 2nd level, between 2 ambulances that had been decommissioned and were waiting for service. She walked over from the employee entrance with her bag over her shoulder, still in scrubs, and she saw them before they saw her. 4 figures in civilian clothes, standing near a gray vehicle, the kind of people who didn't draw attention in groups because they'd learned how not to. Thomas Voss saw her first. He was 41, lean, with the kind of stillness that came from spending years in environments where movement attracted fire. He'd been her team leader for 22 months in a deployment she didn't talk about. He had a scar along his left jaw that he'd gotten in a building collapse, in a city whose name she still couldn't say out loud in mixed company. He didn't hug her. He looked at her the way soldiers look at each other when they haven't seen someone in a while. A quick assessment, checking the basic architecture of a person for damage. "You look tired," he said. 14 months of civilian medicine," she said. "What's your excuse?" The ghost of something moved across his face. "Desk job." She looked at the others. Breck Malone was there. Shorter than the rest, red-haired, the kind of person who looked easygoing until you understood that was a choice he made deliberately because it put people off their guard. Next to him was a woman named Sarah Toland, who'd been a trauma medic with the unit and now worked in some capacity Maya wasn't fully briefed on. The 4th person was a man she recognized but didn't know well, tall, quiet, watching the parking structure exits out of old habit. Who's the fourth? She asked Voss. Darnell Price. He was with the unit before your time. He's got context on something relevant. Voss paused. Why don't you tell us what happened today? She told them. All of it, in order, without emphasis or editorializing. The patient, the assessment, Harlan's response, Burke's write-up, the nursing board call, the conversation at the workstation an hour ago. When she finished, Breck said, He told you to resign. Yes. To your face, in the hospital. Yes? Breck looked at Voss. Something passed between them. Okay, Voss said. So he doesn't know. Nobody here knows, Maya said. You've been here how long? 8 months? And in 8 months, you haven't told anyone about your background. I'm a nurse, she said. That's not a cover story. That's what I am. It's also what you were before, Sarah said quietly. Before the other thing. Maya looked at her. Yeah. Sarah nodded. Voss was quiet for a moment. Then, Tomas, what did you say to Price about what you found? The tall man, Price, stepped forward slightly. He had a measured way of moving, like someone who'd learned to take up exactly as much space as he needed and not 1 inch more. Wade Harlan, he said, is the younger brother of Calvin Harlan, former lieutenant colonel, 4th Support Command. Calvin Harlan was removed from command 7 years ago under circumstances that were described officially as a health-related retirement. He paused. They weren't. Maya went still. Calvin Harlan, Price continued, was the commanding officer of a logistics operation in theater that lost track of a significant quantity of material over a 14-month period. Medical supplies, communication equipment, ordnance components, the kind of thing that doesn't just fall off a truck. He looked at Maya. The investigation was opened and then quietly closed. The report was classified at a level that made it effectively invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Maya said nothing. You know where to look, Voss said. It wasn't a question. She looked at him. Why is he here? She said. Wade Harlan. Why is a small city police officer making personal calls to the nursing board over a disagreement with a nurse? Because Wade Harlan has been watching for something for a long time, Price said. And the reason he's watching, the reason his family has been watching, is that there's outstanding evidence from that investigation that was never recovered. Evidence that if it surfaced now would reopen a case involving people who are not retired, people who are still in positions of authority. The parking structure was quiet. Somewhere below, an elevator opened and closed. He knows who you are, Maya said slowly. He might, Voss said. Or he might have had your name run and gotten close enough to the picture that it scared him. Either way, Breck said, he's not acting like a cop who had a bad morning. He's acting like someone who's been waiting for this specific problem. Maya looked at the wall of the parking structure for a moment. 14 months ago, she had left a military medical unit with an honorable discharge, a medical degree she'd finished on deployment, and a decision to do something that looked quiet from the outside. She had taken a nursing position at a mid-sized hospital in a mid-sized city because mid-sized cities had enough medical volume to stay sharp and not enough profile to attract attention. She had not used her full name in any public record. She had not contacted anyone from her previous life for the first 9 months. She had been careful, and somehow, in 8 months, she had still ended up here, in a parking structure in Calverton, Ohio, talking to 4 people she'd trusted her life to, because a police officer had decided a patient didn't need a chest x-ray. The evidence, she said. No one spoke. I know where it is, she said. I've always known where it is. I kept it in place because releasing it without the right infrastructure around it would have been... She stopped. Incomplete. It would have been incomplete. Voss looked at her steadily. Is the infrastructure there now? She thought about Burke's face when he handed her the write-up. She thought about the nursing board call. She thought about Marcus Delaney in his plastic chair with his one good eye, being taken away from a hospital that wouldn't do a chest film because a police officer wanted to leave. She thought about Wade Harlan saying resign like it was a reasonable request, like she was someone who could be made to disappear. Give me 48 hours, she said. Voss nodded. I need you to stay dark until I say otherwise, she said. No contact with hospital staff. No approaching Harlan. Nothing that announces there are people connected to me. Understood, Voss said. She looked at Breck. You still have the recording capacity we used in Fallowfield? Breck reached into his jacket and held up a device the size of a thumb drive. Upgraded, he said. She took it, put it in her pocket. 48 hours, she said again, and walked back toward the hospital. She was halfway across the parking structure when her phone buzzed. A hospital notification, not a text. She looked at the screen. Patient alert. Marcus Delaney, transferred from detention facility. Pneumothorax, left lobe. Critical condition. Trauma Bay 1. She stopped walking. She stood in the middle of the parking structure for exactly 4 seconds. Then she put her phone in her pocket and broke into a run. By the time she got to Trauma Bay 1, the room was already in controlled chaos, the kind that happened when a patient arrived worse than expected and the team had to reconfigure mid-motion. Delaney was on the table, oxygen mask on, a young resident named Dr. Faisal Obi trying to get a line in while a respiratory tech worked around him. His ASATs were in the low 80s. His left lung had already partially collapsed. Maya walked in, washed, gloved, and was at the table before anyone thought to redirect her. Where's he in the progression? She asked Obi. Partial collapse, left lower lobe, suspected simple pneumo, but it's moving fast, Obi said without looking up. BP is dropping, and his tracheal deviation is just starting. It's becoming tension, she said. We need to decompress now. I know, Do you have the needle, or do you need me to get it? Obi looked up at her for 1 second. He was 28, and he was good, and he knew his own limitations in real time, which was a skill more valuable than most of his training. Get it, he said. She got it. The next 11 minutes were the kind that left no room for anything except the work. Delaney coded twice, once briefly, once longer, and came back both times. She worked beside Obi and a thoracic surgeon named Dr. Yemi Adaora, who arrived 4 minutes in, and the three of them moved around each other in the tight space of the trauma bay with the efficiency of people who had done this under worse conditions. When it was over, Delaney was stable. Barely, but stable. Dr. Adaora straightened up, stripped her gloves, and looked across the table at Maya with an expression that was too tired to be impressed, but was something adjacent to it. Where did you train? She said. Various places, Maya said. Adaora studied her for a moment. Then she looked at the door. Standing in the observation window outside the trauma bay, visible through the glass, was Wade Harlan. He wasn't in uniform, he wasn't supposed to be here, but he was watching, and when Maya looked up and their eyes met through the glass, his face was very still. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she went back to Delaney's chart and started writing. She kept writing for another 4 minutes after Harlan left the window, not because the chart required it, but because she needed the act of writing, the physical discipline of translating a crisis into documentation, to settle something in her chest that hadn't quite settled yet. Delaney's chart was thorough, more thorough than it needed to be. She noted the time of arrival, the time of her assessment in the corridor that morning, the clinical findings she had documented, the name of the officer who had authorized transport over her objection, and the outcome. She did not editorialize. She did not use language that would give anyone grounds to call it a personal complaint. She wrote it the way she had been trained to write field medical reports, in the passive voice of observed fact, so specific that there was no space between the words and what had happened. When she was done, she sent a copy to her personal encrypted drive and printed a hard copy, which she folded and put in her scrub pocket next to the thumb drive Breck had handed her. Then she went to find Priya. Priya was in the medication room, which was technically off limits except for authorized nursing staff, which was why Priya had gone there. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the refrigerator unit, knees pulled up, still in her scrubs. She'd looked up when Maya came in and closed the door. He made it, Maya said. Delaney. He coded twice, but he's stable. Priya let out a breath that had clearly been held for a long time. The pneumo. Tension. It progressed during transport, which is what you said it would do. Yeah. Priya was quiet. Then, is it in the chart, what you said this morning, the documentation? All of it, time-stamped. Priya looked at the floor. Burke is going to try to walk it back. He's going to say there was no clinical basis for delaying transport. He can say whatever he wants, Maya said. The documentation exists, and Delaney's outcome is the documentation. Priya looked up at her. There was something careful in her expression. Not quite suspicion, but the specific alertness of someone who has started to understand that a situation is more layered than it appeared. "Who were you talking to in the parking structure?" she said. Maya looked at her. "What did you see?" "I was on break, second level. I saw you walk over to a group of people by a gray vehicle. 4 of them." She paused. "They looked like... I don't know what they looked like. Not civilians." "They're not civilians," Maya said. "Are they going to make this worse?" Maya considered the question seriously, the way it deserved. "I don't know yet," she said. "Probably before it gets better." She paused. "Did anyone else see?" "I don't think so." Priya hesitated. "Maya, what is actually happening? Because this started this morning as a disagreement over a patient transport, and it feels like it became something else. And I don't..." She stopped. "I don't know what I don't know, and that's the part that's scaring me." Maya sat down on the edge of the supply shelf across from her. The medication room was small and cold and smelled like antiseptic and paper packaging, and it was one of the few places in the hospital where no camera covered the interior. "I'm going to tell you enough," Maya said. "Not everything, because everything is complicated and some of it isn't mine to share yet, but enough so you understand what you're standing next to." Priya nodded. "Before I was a nurse here," Maya said, "I was a military medical officer, Special Operations Unit, embedded support role. I did that for 7 years. During the last 2 years of that, I came across information about a procurement corruption network. People inside military logistics who were diverting equipment and supplies and covering the movement through falsified records. The people involved had enough rank and enough connections that going through standard channels would have buried the evidence before it reached anyone with authority to act on it." She paused. "So I didn't go through standard channels. I documented everything I could access. I secured it in a way that couldn't be touched by the people it implicated. And then I got out and waited." Priya stared at her. "Waited for what?" "For the right structure. Investigators who were far enough outside the network to be safe. A legal mechanism that would hold under pressure." She looked at her hands. "These things take time. Evidence that surfaces too early, without the right framework, doesn't just fail. It gives the people it implicates time to destroy everything else." "And Wade Harlan," Priya said slowly, "he's connected to this." "His older brother is, Calvin Harlan, former officer, central figure in the operation. And Wade knows who you are. He might, or he got close enough to the answer that the proximity scared him into action." Maya looked at her evenly. "Either way, this morning wasn't about a patient transport disagreement. He came here for a specific reason, and when I pushed back, he escalated because he's been running on a version of authority that's never been tested. He doesn't know what he's pushing against." Priya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do you need from me?" "Right now, nothing. Do your job. Document everything you observe, every interaction with Harlan or Burke, every irregularity in protocol. Don't share it with anyone. Don't talk to hospital administration about what I've told you." She paused. "And if anyone asks you about the people in the parking structure, you didn't see anything." Priya looked at her for a long moment. "Okay," she said. "You can still walk away from this," Maya said. "I want to be clear about that." "I know." Priya got to her feet, smoothing her scrubs. "But I watched them take a man out of this hospital who needed a chest film, and he almost died in a transport van. And Wade Harlan is still walking around in here like he owns the place." She met Maya's eyes. "So no, I don't want to walk away from it." Maya nodded. She stood up, and they went back to work. The call from the Ohio Nursing Board came the next morning at 7:43. Maya took it in the stairwell between floors 2 and 3, where the signal was strong enough and the foot traffic light enough that she could hear clearly. The voice on the other end belonged to a licensing review coordinator named Gerald Finch, who spoke in the careful tone of someone delivering information they've been instructed to deliver without interpretation. A formal review had been initiated. The basis was a complaint filed by a law enforcement officer describing clinical interference with a lawful procedure and a pattern of confrontational behavior toward authority figures. The review would include an assessment of her full employment history, and any previous complaints or incident reports. She would receive formal written notice within 5 business days. She was not currently suspended, but the board wanted her to be aware that the process had begun. She thanked Finch, hung up, and stood in the stairwell for a moment looking at the painted concrete wall. Then she called Tomas Voss. "The board inquiry is official," she said when he picked up. "We know," he said. "Price has a contact at the board. The complaint was filed with supporting documentation. They forwarded something that looks like a compiled personnel summary, more detailed than a standard complaint. Meaning he accessed records he shouldn't have been able to access. Meaning someone helped him access records he shouldn't have been able to access." A pause. "Maya, we need to move faster than 48 hours. "I know. The people he's connected to, they're watching this. If they see the board inquiry as an opportunity to push harder, they're going to push harder." "I understand." She looked up the stairwell, then down. "I need one more day. There's something here in the hospital I need to handle first." "What?" She thought about Delaney's chart, about the write-up in her file, about the way Burke's face had gone careful and flat when she'd asked him to document his decision. "Burke knew this morning that transport was premature," she said. "He made a call that nearly killed a patient because he didn't want to inconvenience a police officer with connections. That's not a gray area. That's documented negligence." She paused. "I need that in front of someone who can act on it before Harlan has time to sanitize the record." Voss was quiet. "If I go after the Harlan network and leave Burke's decision unaddressed, Burke becomes a vulnerability," she said. "He'll do whatever they tell him to do to protect himself. I need him neutralized as a factor first." "How?" "I have a contact at the Ohio Department of Health, Patient Safety Division." She'd used that contact once before, at Morrow Valley, in one of the 2 incidents referenced in her personnel file, the incident that had been reviewed and closed. "They can open a clinical review on the transport decision independently of anything connected to me. It takes Burke out of Harlan's control without making it look like I initiated it." Another pause. Then, "Do it, and then call me." She hung up, went to the 4th floor, found an empty conference room, and made the second call. By midday, 3 things had happened. The Ohio Department of Health had confirmed receipt of a patient safety complaint regarding the unauthorized early transport of a critical patient from Harlan General's emergency department. The complaint had been filed by Dr. Yemi Adaora, who had agreed to put her name on it when Maya explained the documentation she had. Adaora was the kind of surgeon who had spent 22 years watching administrative decisions override clinical judgment, and she had been waiting, in her own words, for a complaint that was airtight enough to be worth the bureaucratic war. This one was. Harlan had returned to the hospital for the 3rd time in 2 days, and this time he had gone directly to the nursing station and asked for Maya's schedule. The charge coordinator, a quiet woman named Denise, had told him scheduling information was not available to non-staff and offered to connect him with hospital administration. He had declined and left. And Priya had found something. She appeared in the doorway of the family consultation room where Maya was reviewing Delaney's morning labs, and she had the expression of someone who has been carrying information carefully and is relieved to set it down. "I found something in the monitoring footage," Priya said. She came in and closed the door and pulled out her personal phone. "From yesterday morning, the admissions corridor." Maya looked at the phone. The footage was shaky, shot from what looked like a phone tucked at an angle in a jacket pocket, but the audio was clear and the visual was clear enough. It showed Harlan's back, and over his shoulder, the intake desk, and the conversation that followed was audible in full. "Where did you get this?" Maya asked. "Intern. 3rd-year med student. His name is Joel Tanaka. He was doing a rotation in the ER yesterday, and he said he started recording when he saw what was happening because he didn't think anyone else was doing anything." Priya hesitated. "He was afraid to come forward. He said he didn't want to lose his rotation placement." "What made him give it to you?" "He heard about Delaney, about what happened." Priya looked at the floor. "He said he'd been thinking about it all night." Maya looked at the footage again, the conversation between Priya and Harlan, her own arrival, Burke's contribution, Harlan's direct instruction to Burke to remove her from the patient, Burke's compliance, all of it. 31 minutes of it. "Does anyone else know this exists?" she asked. "No." Not the hospital administration. No. Not Harlan. No. Maya handed the phone back to Priya. Tell Tanaka to keep his head down and his name out of anything for right now. Don't make copies on hospital equipment. Keep this on his personal device and yours and nowhere else. Okay. And Priya. She looked at her directly. This matters. Tell him it matters. Priya nodded and left. Maya sat alone in the consultation room with the morning labs in her hand. Delaney's bilirubin was elevated, which was a secondary concern, and his chest drain was still active, which was expected, and his left lung was reinflating on the overnight films, which was the thing that mattered most. She thought about the footage. 31 minutes. Harlan's voice flat and certain, telling Burke to remove a charge nurse from a patient she had flagged as critical. Burke nodding before Harlan finished the sentence. She thought about what Voss had said. The people he's connected to. They're watching. She thought about what Price had said. Outstanding evidence from that investigation that was never recovered. And she thought about something she hadn't told either of them. Something she hadn't told anyone, that existed only in her own memory and in a set of files stored on a drive that was not connected to any network and had not been connected to any network since the day she'd created it. The evidence from the investigation into Calvin Harlan's logistics operation was not just financial records and procurement logs. Those were important, but they were the kind of important that took months to trace through legal process. What made the file genuinely dangerous, what made it the kind of thing people would do significant harm to suppress, was a different category of document. It was a communication record. 47 messages spanning 8 months between Calvin Harlan and 3 individuals who were not, at the time of those messages, affiliated with any military branch. 2 of them had since entered government service. One of them was currently in a position that carried federal appointment. She had known this for 3 years. She had waited because releasing that kind of evidence without the right legal structure didn't just fail. It disappeared. The people it implicated had the resources to make evidence disappear. She had seen it happen to 2 other investigators who had come at the same network from different angles before she had. But she had also known, in the back of some very quiet part of her thinking, that waiting was only viable as long as she remained invisible. She wasn't invisible anymore. She stood up, put Delaney's labs down, and walked to the window. Outside, the hospital parking lot was ordinary. Cars, a food truck near the service entrance, a group of nurses on a smoke break near the far fence, sharing a joke about something, laughing. Ordinary afternoon light on an ordinary day in a mid-sized city. And in the far corner of the lot, a dark sedan she didn't recognize, parked at an angle that had nothing to do with the nearest parking space. She watched it for 40 seconds. It didn't move. The driver's window was tinted, but she could see enough of the silhouette inside to know someone was sitting there. She stepped back from the window. Her phone buzzed, a text from Voss. We've got a tail. Dark vehicle, Ohio plates, been following Price since this morning. Not police. She typed back, I see a sedan in the hospital lot. Has been stationary for at least a minute. A pause. Then, Maya, they're not waiting to see what you do. They've already decided. She read the message, then she read it again. 7 years of patience, 14 months of quiet, 8 months of ordinary morning shifts and blood transfusion management and bad coffee in the nurse's lounge. She walked out of the consultation room, down the hall, and into the supply room she'd been using as a secondary documentation space. She opened her locker, pushed aside a set of spare scrubs, and removed a small metal case no larger than a paperback novel. Inside was a drive, black, unmarked, the kind of hardware that looked unremarkable until you understood what was on it. She held it in her hand for a moment. 47 messages. 3 years of waiting. Her phone buzzed again. Not Voss this time. A hospital extension. She answered. Reeves, said the voice of Director Callum Burke. I need you in my office, immediately. I'm with a patient. You're not. I can see the consultation room is empty. I need you in my office in the next 5 minutes. A pause. Officer Harlan is here, and he's brought someone with him. She looked at the drive in her hand. I'll be right there, she said. She put the drive in her scrub pocket, next to the thumb drive from Breck. 2 small pieces of hardware. Everything she had built toward for 3 years, and a recording device the size of her thumbnail. She closed the locker. She smoothed her scrubs. She walked out of the supply room and toward the administrative corridor. The person Wade Harlan had brought with him was sitting in Burke's outer office when she arrived. A man in his late 50s, in a dark suit that didn't belong to anyone who worked at a hospital. He had the particular composure of someone who had spent a long time being the most important person in any room they entered, and he looked at Maya when she walked in with the specific attention of someone assessing a variable they had previously underestimated. She had never seen him before, but she recognized the type. And more than that, she recognized, with the cold certainty of a person who has spent years learning to read these things, that this man had not come here to talk. He had come here to make sure she understood very clearly that the 48 hours she'd asked for were already gone. His name, she found out later, was Gareth Mullen. Not then. Not in Burke's outer office, where he sat with his dark suit and his assessing eyes, and didn't offer a name or a hand or any of the social gestures that people use to signal they're operating in good faith. She found out later through Voss, who ran the face through 3 different databases before he got a hit on a contract consulting firm registered in Delaware that had no website and 4 employees on paper and had received 17 federal procurement contracts over 9 years. But in the moment, standing in the doorway of Burke's outer office with her hand steady at her side and 2 drives in her scrub pocket, all she had was the look of him. And the look of him was enough to tell her that whatever was about to happen in Burke's office was not a conversation. It was a message delivery system. Gareth Mullen was the message. "Nurse Reeves," Burke said from the inner doorway. "Please come in." She went in. Wade Harlan was already seated, the chair to the left of Burke's desk, positioned so that anyone entering would have to walk past him. He'd chosen the angle deliberately. She clocked it and kept moving and sat in the chair across from Burke without looking at Harlan again. Mullen came in last and closed the door and stood near it rather than sitting, which told her he preferred to be between her and the exit. She noted that, filed it. Burke sat behind his desk and folded his hands in the particular way that meant he'd rehearsed what came next. "I want to begin by saying that this conversation is being conducted in the interest of resolving a situation that has become unnecessarily disruptive to hospital operations." "Who is he?" Maya said, nodding toward Mullen. Burke's folded hands tightened slightly. "Mr. Mullen is a consultant engaged by whom?" "By stakeholders with an interest in the operational continuity of stakeholders," she said. Not a question. Burke stopped. Harlan leaned forward. "Nobody's here to threaten you," he said, which was such a specific thing to say unprompted that it confirmed the opposite immediately. "We're here because the situation yesterday created some concerns, and those concerns need to be addressed before they become—" "A patient is in the ICU," Maya said, "with a tension pneumothorax that progressed during unauthorized early transport. His current status is serious but stable, and the clinical notes from yesterday morning document the specific findings I presented before transport was ordered over my objection." She looked at Burke. "If that's the situation you're referring to, I'd be glad to discuss it." Burke's jaw moved. "The transport decision has been reviewed internally, and the Ohio Department of Health opened a patient safety inquiry this morning," she said. "So the internal review is now secondary." The room went quiet. It was the particular quiet of a space where someone has said a thing that changes the geometry of every other thing in the room. Harlan's posture shifted. Burke's folded hands unfolded. Mullen, near the door, didn't move, but something in the set of his shoulders changed. "That inquiry," Burke said carefully, "is premature and was likely initiated based on incomplete—" "It was initiated by Dr. Adaora based on documented clinical findings and the recorded outcome of the patient." She paused. "It's going to run its course regardless of what happens in this room." Harlan stood up. He didn't move toward her. He stood up the way large men stand up in small offices when they've decided that their physical presence is the next argument. He put his hands on the back of his chair and looked at her with the expression of someone who has arrived at the limit of their patience and is making sure the other person knows it. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said. "I'm sitting in a chair," she said. "You are—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "You're interfering in something that is around you, for the nurses who work with you, for— Are you threatening my colleagues? I'm describing reality." "Reality," she said, is that a man almost died yesterday because you wanted to leave before a chess film was done. Everything else is a different conversation. Mullen spoke for the first time. His voice was even and quiet and had the quality of a man who was used to rooms where raising your voice was considered a failure of technique. "Nurse Reeves," he said, "your nursing board review is an active proceeding. The board takes complaints seriously, particularly when they're accompanied by documentation from multiple sources describing a pattern of clinical overreach." He paused. "There are people in a position to ensure that review reaches a swift and definitive conclusion. The question is, what kind of conclusion?" She looked at him. "There's also the matter of your employment status here," he continued. "Director Burke has significant discretion over staffing decisions, including the reassignment or termination of charge nurses whose performance has become a source of documented concern." She kept looking at him. His face was calm. His tone was informational. He was describing the levers he had access to the way a mechanic describes tools, not with malice, just with the practiced certainty of a person who knows exactly what each one does. "I see," she said. "What we're offering," Mullen said, "is a clean exit. The board review is withdrawn. Your employment record is closed without finding. You leave Calverton and you continue your career elsewhere without interference. And if I don't, then the review proceeds. The documentation against you is substantial and it will be supplemented. Your record at Morrow Valley will be re-examined. The incident involving the transport contractor will be recharacterized." He said it without blinking. "You'll lose your license, Nurse Reeves. Not immediately, but you'll lose it." The office was very quiet. Maya looked at the surface of Burke's desk for a moment. There was a pen holder and a framed photograph and a coffee mug with a Harlan General logo on it, and these things were so ordinary against the texture of the conversation that for a second she felt the particular vertigo of a person watching two different realities occupy the same space. She looked up. "I need to get back to my patients," she said, and stood up. She made 4 calls in the next 90 minutes, each from a different location in the hospital. The stairwell, the parking structure, a supply alcove on the 3rd floor, the rooftop access corridor that the facility's staff used and almost no one else did. The first was to Tomas Voss. She told him about Mullen and what Mullen had said, and Voss listened without interrupting, and when she was done he said, "Price can get a name match on the consultant firm by tomorrow morning. I need it faster. Tonight then." "Tonight." The second call was to a woman named Naomi Slade, who was an attorney in Columbus and who Maya had met 3 years ago through a channel she didn't explain and didn't need to. Naomi Slade handled federal whistleblower cases and had a particular specialty in cases that involved institutional interference with clinical or investigative personnel. Maya had never used her. She had kept her number in her phone for 3 years in the same way she had kept the drive in her locker, as a thing she hoped not to need and knew she would eventually. Naomi Slade answered on the second ring and said, "I was wondering when you'd call. You've been expecting me? I've been watching the Harlan name come up in a few different contexts for about 6 months. When Price reached out to me last week and mentioned Calverton, I started paying closer attention." A pause. "How bad is it?" "They threatened my license and my employment in the same conversation. There's a consultant named Gareth Mullen who seems to be coordinating the pressure." "Mullen." Slade's voice shifted slightly. "Delaware registered firm, federal procurement background." "You know him." "I know of the firm. It's been adjacent to 2 other cases I've tracked." Another pause. "Maya, if Mullen is involved, this is not a local operation. Someone with federal reach is running support for Wade Harlan." "I know." "The drive you have?" "Yes." "Is it safe?" "For now." "We need to move it into a protected evidentiary channel before the end of this week," Slade said. "If Mullen's people decide to escalate from pressure to something more direct." "I know," Maya said again. "I'm coming to Calverton." "Not yet. I need 2 more days." A pause that felt like Slade calculating something. "What are you doing in 2 days?" "Setting something up." "What kind of something?" "The kind that gives them a reason to move before they're ready." Slade went quiet for a moment. Then, "Be careful about the difference between drawing them out and making yourself the target." "I know the difference," Maya said. "I know you do. I'm reminding you anyway. She hung up and made the third call. To Breck, to confirm the recording device was functioning and to update him on Mullen's presence. Breck confirmed it and added something she hadn't expected. He'd been watching the hospital's external camera feeds through a contact who worked hospital IT, and the dark sedan in the parking lot had been joined by a second vehicle on the north side of the building sometime in the last hour. 2 vehicles, she said, positioned at the 2 main exits. She didn't say anything for a moment. They're not going to do anything while you're inside, Breck said. Too visible, but they're watching for when you leave. I'm not planning to leave tonight. Okay. A pause. Maya, the footage Priya has, the intern's phone footage, is it somewhere safe? She thought about Priya and the medication room floor and the careful way Priya had said okay when Maya had told her what she was standing next to. It's on 2 personal devices and I trust the people holding them. That's not the same as somewhere safe. I know. I'm working on it. The 4th call was the shortest. She called Darnell Price directly and said 3 sentences. Gareth Mullen, Delaware firm, federal procurement background. Cross-reference to Calvin Harlan's active contacts in the 2 years before his retirement. Call her when he had something. Price said, 4 hours. She said, 3. He said, 3.5. She said, fine, and hung up. Sent. She spent the next 2 hours doing her job. Not strategically, not as a way to maintain appearances. She went back to her patients because her patients needed her, and because the work had always been the thing that organized her when other things didn't. Bay 6's post-op was developing a mild fever and needed her antibiotic protocol reviewed. A new admission in Bay 4 had presented with what looked like a diabetic foot ulcer, but whose glucose readings were inconsistent in a way that suggested something else was happening. An elderly patient in observation had become agitated and frightened and needed someone to sit with her for 20 minutes and explain, slowly, what was happening and what came next. Maya sat with her for 22 minutes. The woman's name was Eleanor Fitch, and she was 74, and she kept asking about her dog, whether someone had fed her dog, and Maya told her each time that she was sure someone had, and that they were going to look into it. And the 3rd time she said it, she flagged the social work coordinator and left a note about the dog, because the dog was clearly the thing that was going to determine whether Eleanor Fitch's blood pressure stabilized, and sometimes the most tactical thing you could do was feed someone's dog. She was updating Bay 4's chart when Priya appeared at her elbow. Someone pulled your file from the hospital record system, Priya said. Low, quick. Administrative access. About 30 minutes ago. I only know because I was in the record system at the same time looking at Delaney's updated notes, and I saw the access log. Maya kept typing. Which file? Your full employment file. Everything. Onboarding, performance reviews, incident reports, certifications. Priya hesitated, and they pulled your emergency contact and personal address. Maya's hand stopped on the keyboard. She had listed an address when she'd been hired, a rental unit in a part of Calverton she no longer lived in, because the specific category of caution she'd applied to her life for 3 years included not listing her actual address anywhere that a motivated person with administrative access could pull it. She had updated her actual residence with the post office and her bank and nowhere else, so whoever had pulled that record would get a dead address. But they had pulled it, which meant the calculation had shifted from pressure her to leave to find out where she goes. Who initiated the access? She asked. Burke's administrative login, Priya said. But Burke went home at 4, so either he left his session open or someone used his credentials. She looked at Priya. The footage on Tanaka's phone. What about it? I need it transferred tonight, not to a hospital device. Off-site storage through a secure channel. She pulled out a piece of paper, actual paper, and wrote down an encrypted transfer address Naomi Slade had texted her earlier. Give this to Tanaka. Tell him to use his personal data plan, not hospital Wi-Fi. Tell him to do it from off-hospital property. Priya looked at the paper, looked at Maya. Tonight. As soon as possible. Priya folded the paper and put it in her pocket. Is this getting dangerous? Like, actually dangerous? Maya considered the honest answer to that question. Priya deserved the honest answer. Someone just pulled my home address from hospital records using a director's credentials after hours, she said. So I think the answer is that it's already there. Priya's face went through something complicated. Then it settled into the same expression she'd had in the corridor the previous morning, standing between Harlan and Marcus Delaney with her chart in her shaking hands. Okay, she said. I'll find Tanaka. She left. Maya went back to her chart, finished the notation, submitted it, and then sat for a moment looking at the workstation screen. Price called at 9:47 p.m. Gareth Mullen, Price said without preamble. Delaware firm, real name is Meridian Consulting Associates. 7 years of federal contract history, all through a procurement liaison channel that ran through the 4th Support Command's Civilian Oversight Office. A pause. The Oversight Office that Calvin Harlan's operation was connected to. Who funds it? That's where it gets complicated. The contract chain runs through 3 intermediaries before it hits anything with a name attached. But the most recent contract, awarded 14 months ago, lists a cosigner on the oversight authorization. Who? A federal appointee. Current position, Deputy Director of Acquisition Policy, Department of Defense. Another pause. His name is Raymond Stokes. He signed off on a $14 million contract to Meridian Consulting Associates while simultaneously sitting on the review board that should have been investigating Calvin Harlan's logistics operation. She went very still. Raymond Stokes. She knew that name. Not from a file. From the 47 messages on the drive in her scrub pocket. Messages exchanged between Calvin Harlan and 3 individuals, one of whom had since entered a position that carried federal appointment. Raymond Stokes was the 3rd individual. Are you sure? She said. 3-source confirmation, Price said. Yes. She looked at the far wall of the nursing station. The PA system crackled overhead. A routine page, something about a consult on floor 4. The drive, she said. The communication records. Yes. Stokes is in it. I know, Price said. I've been sitting on this for 6 hours because I wanted to be sure before I said it out loud. A pause. Maya. If Stokes is in the communications and he's currently a federal appointee, this is not a nursing board complaint and a local police officer anymore. This is a criminal conspiracy with an active federal participant. I know what it is. The people watching the hospital tonight, they're not there because Wade Harlan is nervous about a patient safety inquiry. They're there because someone with federal-level resources authorized surveillance of a witness. She stood up from the workstation. Get Voss and the others, she said. Not the hospital, somewhere near but not visible. I'm going to need everyone in position by morning. What are you going to do tonight? She looked down at her scrub pocket. The drive. The recorder. I'm going to make sure everything we have is somewhere safe, she said. And then I'm going to make one call that changes the shape of this. She hung up. Walked to the window. The north parking lot was lit with orange overhead lights, and she could see at the far edge of the lot the clean lines of a vehicle parked at the same non-space angle as the one she'd seen earlier. She pulled out her phone and opened the secure message app she hadn't used in over a year. She typed a contact name, 2 initials only, the way she always referenced them, and composed a message of 4 sentences. She described the situation, the evidence, the name Raymond Stokes, and the current location of the drive. She sent it. Then she put her phone in her pocket and went back to her patients, and she stayed at her patients until 2 in the morning, when the overnight shift was fully settled and the hallways were as quiet as a hospital ever got. She was in the break room on the 2nd floor, drinking her 3rd cup of bad coffee, when the door opened and Burke walked in. Not Director Burke in a blazer. Burke in street clothes, a jacket over a shirt that looked like he'd put it on fast, his face carrying the particular pallor of a man who hasn't slept. He looked at her, and he closed the door and he stood there for a moment like he wasn't certain yet what he'd decided to say. She waited. Delaney is going to make a full recovery, he said finally. Dr. Aduora said so this afternoon. I know. Burke looked at the floor. I should have... He stopped, started again. This morning, yesterday morning, I should have backed you up. She looked at him. His face was doing something genuine, which surprised her, not because she thought Burke was incapable of it, but because she hadn't expected it tonight. Why didn't you? She said. Because I've been managing Harlan for 2 years, he said. Not just him, the whole relationship with the department, the city contracts, the referral agreements. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. I told myself it was pragmatism, that keeping those relationships functional meant I could do more good overall than, he exhaled, than I could if I picked every fight. You picked the wrong one not to pick, she said. Yes. His voice was flat, with the particular flatness of a man agreeing with something he'd been arguing with himself about for 36 hours. What's going to happen to me? With the DOH inquiry. She considered him. That depends on what you do next. He looked up. You have a decision to make before morning, she said. Everything I've documented, everything Aurora has filed, and everything that's been observed in this hospital for the last 2 days is going into a formal evidentiary submission to federal investigators. Not the nursing board, not the DOH, federal. She held his gaze. You can be in that submission as someone who made a bad call under pressure and then cooperated fully when the full picture became clear. Or you can be in it as someone who used his administrative access to pull a staff member's personal records for a third party at 9:30 at night. Burke went very white. Someone used your login, she said, at 9:32 p.m. While you were logged in from home, presumably, which means either you authorized it or someone had your credentials. I didn't... He stopped. I didn't pull anything. I wasn't in the system tonight. Then someone had your credentials. She watched his face. How long have you known Gareth Mullen? Burke's mouth opened, closed. He contacted me 3 weeks ago, he said. Said he was consulting on operational efficiency for the hospital's city partnership agreements. He asked for... Burke looked suddenly ill. He asked for administrative login credentials to review compliance documentation. And you gave them to him. Burke sat down on one of the break room chairs. He sat heavily, like something had come out of him. I need an attorney, he said. Yes, she said. You do. I can give you a name. She pulled out her battered notepad and wrote Naomi Slade's number. She tore the page out and set it on the table in front of him. He looked at it. The call I need you to make first, she said, is to your IT director. Tonight. You need to report unauthorized access to your credentials and lock the login. If Mullen's people have been in the hospital record system, there's a trail, and that trail needs to be preserved before someone clears it. Burke looked at the number on the notepad. He looked at Maya. Is this going to destroy the hospital? He said. Harlan General, the relationships, the contracts. It's going to expose some people who have been using this hospital, she said. That's not the same thing. Burke picked up the notepad page. He sat looking at it for a moment. Then his phone was in his hand and he was dialing his IT director's personal cell, and his voice when he spoke was careful and controlled, the voice of a man who had found, at 2 a.m. in a hospital break room, the one thing he had been too careful to do yesterday. Maya picked up her coffee and left him to it. She was halfway to the stairwell when her phone buzzed. The secure message app, a reply from the 2 initials she'd messaged an hour ago. Received. We know Stokes. We've been building toward him from a different direction for 8 months. What you have completes the chain. Can you hold 24 hours? She typed back. Situation on the ground is accelerating. I don't know if I have 24 hours. The reply came in 11 seconds. Then we move tonight. Don't go home. Don't be alone. We're mobilizing. She stood in the stairwell looking at the message. She had spent 3 years waiting for this. 3 years of patience and careful silence and an ordinary life constructed around a single extraordinary thing she was carrying. She had imagined this moment, not as triumph because she knew enough about how these things actually went to have cleared triumph out of her expectations years ago, but as the moment the door finally opened. It didn't feel like a door opening, it felt like the floor dropping. She put her phone in her pocket and went back to her patients. At 3:46 in the morning, every security camera on the hospital's second floor went offline simultaneously. The cameras going offline was not a coincidence, and she didn't treat it like one. She was at the second-floor nursing station when the alert came through on the facility monitoring system. A small red indicator on the workstation screen that the overnight security coordinator, a man named Dennis Farrow, was already calling about before she'd finished reading it. She picked up the internal line, and Dennis said, All second-floor exterior cameras, simultaneous dropout. I'm getting nothing from the corridor feeds either. And she said, Lock the stairwell doors on 2 and 3 from the security panel. Do it now and call the overnight administrator. And Dennis said, "That's Burke." And she said, "I know, call him anyway," and hung up. She was already moving. The second floor housed the step-down unit and 2 general medical wards, and at the far end of the east corridor, the room where Marcus Delaney was recovering with a chest drain and a blood pressure that had finally stabilized 12 hours ago. She walked fast, not running, because running in a hospital at 3:46 in the morning created a different kind of problem. It moved through the building and changed the air and woke people up and made everyone ask questions she didn't have time to answer. She passed the nursing station for the step-down unit, gave the overnight nurse a look that said, "Stay where you are and watch everything," and kept moving. Delaney's room was at the end of the corridor. The door was closed. The light under the door was the ordinary faint blue of nighttime medical lighting. She pushed the door open. Delaney was in his bed, awake. The dropout of the cameras had apparently reached him too, because he was sitting up at an angle his drain tube made uncomfortable. His one functional eye aimed at the door with the particular alertness of a man who had learned to treat unexpected things as threats. "You okay?" she said. "Someone was in the hall," he said. 5 minutes ago, walking slow." "Did they come in?" "No, but they stopped outside." She looked at him for a moment. He was not what she'd expected. That first morning in the admissions corridor, she'd expected a man who would be frightened and passive, because most patients were, because the hospital environment was designed in a way that made people feel small and dependent. Instead, he had been watchful. He'd tracked everything in that corridor with his one working eye while Wade Harlan stood over him, and he'd answered her directly when she asked him about the pain. And in the trauma bay, he'd been conscious through most of it and had not made a single sound that wasn't useful information. "I'm going to have someone sit outside this door for the rest of the night," she said. "Who?" "Someone I trust." He looked at her. "You're the nurse who got pulled off me yesterday morning." "Yes." "And you're the one who came back and put the needle in." "Dr. Adewora did the procedure." "You handed her what she needed and told her where to put it." He settled back slightly, wincing at the drain. "What's happening in this building right now?" She considered how much to tell him. He was a patient, and she owed him honest information about his medical status and nothing beyond that. But he was also a man who had been zip-tied in a police transport van while his lung collapsed, and he was looking at her with the eyes of someone who understood clearly that what was happening was not finished. "Someone cut the security cameras on this floor," she said. "I don't know yet if it's a distraction or a precursor. Either way, I want someone outside your door." "Okay," he said. "Is there anything you haven't told anyone? About why Harlan brought you in yesterday?" His jaw tightened, the first visible tell she'd seen from him. "He pulled me over 3 blocks from the courthouse," Delaney said. "I had a deposition in the morning. Employment discrimination case. I was the plaintiff's witness." He paused. "The defendant's attorney is a man named Creed Albright. I've seen Albright at a fundraiser with Wade Harlan." She looked at him. "Do you have documentation of the deposition?" "My attorney does." "Call them in the morning, first thing." She moved toward the door. "I'm going to be back in 20 minutes. Lock this behind me." "I don't have a lock." "Then push the call button if anyone comes back to that door." She went back into the corridor. Awesome. Breck was already inside the building. She found him in the facility's corridor on the ground floor, which was the route she'd told Voss about 6 hours ago as an entry point that bypassed the main security checkpoints. He was in plain clothes, and he had a small case with him that she didn't ask about, and he fell into step beside her without a word. "Cameras," she said. "I know, Voss flagged it. Someone pulled the power to the second-floor exterior junction box. It's a physical cut, not a system intrusion." "So someone was on the building?" "Yes." "They didn't come inside?" "Not yet." He glanced at her. "Or they did, and they're still in." She thought about that for half a step. "I need you on Delaney's corridor, end of East Wing, second floor. Don't make contact with hospital staff. Don't explain yourself to anyone. Just be there." "For how long?" "Until Voss gets here, or until something happens. Whichever is first." Breck nodded. He took the stairwell door she held open and was gone. She went back to the nursing station and found Dennis Farrow on the phone, reading someone a list of camera IDs from a printed log sheet in the careful voice of a man who was trying very hard to do his job correctly in a situation his training hadn't fully covered. She waited for him to finish, then said, "The junction box for the second floor exterior cameras. Where is it physically located?" "North maintenance access," Dennis said. "Outside the building. It's padlocked normally." "Is there any record of authorized access tonight?" "No, I've checked the access log twice." "I need that padlock photographed in its current state, and I need those photos time-stamped and stored off the hospital system. Your personal phone, not hospital equipment." Dennis stared at her. "Is this a—" "Yes," she said. "Do it now, please." He went. She called Naomi Slade at 4 in the morning because Naomi Slade had told her to call the moment something escalated, and the cameras going down was the kind of thing that met that threshold. Slade answered without any sound of sleep in her voice, which meant she hadn't been sleeping either. "Talk to me." Maya described the last hour in order. The records access, Burke's break room conversation, the cameras, Delaney's information about the deposition, and Creed Albright. When she finished, Slade said, "Albright is a flag. He's connected to 3 civil cases in the last 5 years where witnesses experienced unusual complications before depositions, 2 car accidents, 1 medical emergency." A pause. "This isn't just the Harlan Network protecting Calvin's history. This is an active obstruction operation." "I know." "The drive needs to leave the building tonight." "I know that too." "Can you get it out?" Maya looked at the drive in her pocket. The corridor was empty. The hospital hummed around her with its ordinary nighttime sounds. Monitors, ventilation, the distant movement of the overnight staff going about the work of keeping people alive. "Yes, she said. "Get it to Price. He can hand carry it to my office by morning. I have a federal investigator meeting me at 7 a.m. A woman named Dara Westbrook. She works out of the DOJ Inspector General's office. She's been building the Stokes case from the procurement side for 8 months. Slade's voice was careful and exact. "What you have is the communications piece she's been missing. With both parts together, Westbrook can move on Stokes within 72 hours. 72 hours, Maya said. That's fast for federal. A lot can happen in 72 hours. "Yes," Slade said, "which is why the drive leaves the building tonight." She called Price, who was already in a vehicle 2 blocks from the hospital, because Price had the specific professional habit of being near things before he was asked to be. She told him the drive was coming out and to wait at the service entrance on the south side. Then she went back to the break room on the second floor and poured out the rest of her cold coffee and stood at the window for a moment. The lot was quiet. The sedan on the north side was still there. She could see it at the edge of the orange light. It hadn't moved. She took the drive out of her pocket and held it for a moment. 3 years. She had carried this thing, not the physical object, which had been in a locker, but the weight of what was on it, for 3 years. In the unit, on deployment, in the months after. During the 14 months of deliberate quiet in Calverton. During 8 months of morning shifts and bad coffee and patients who needed their dog fed. She had kept it because releasing it wrong meant it disappeared. She had kept it because the people it implicated had enough reach to make witnesses disappear along with evidence. She had kept it because she was good at patience. She'd been trained to be, in environments where acting before the right moment was the thing most likely to get you and everyone around you killed. But patience had a cost. She knew what the cost was. She had paid it in the specific loneliness of a person who is carrying something too heavy to share and too important to put down. She put the drive back in her pocket and walked to the south service entrance. Price was there. She handed him the drive through the door without ceremony, because ceremony was not what the moment needed. "Slade will be expecting you," she said. He looked at the drive in his hand, then at her. "You doing okay?" "No," she said, "but I'm functional." "That works," he said, and left. What? At 6:15 in this morning, Wade Harlan arrived at the hospital. Not with Mullen. Alone, in his own vehicle. In street clothes. At an hour when the morning shift was beginning to turn over from overnight but wasn't yet fully settled. The specific window when a building was most porous, when the people leaving were tired and the people arriving were not yet fully present. Maya knew he was there because Breck texted her from the east corridor. Harlan, main entrance 614, moving toward admin. She was already in the administrative corridor. She had slept for 40 minutes on a break room couch and had changed into a fresh set of scrubs from her locker and had eaten half a granola bar that tasted like cardboard. And she felt, in the particular way of a person who has been trained to function on insufficient rest, adequate. Not good, not sharp in the way she preferred, but adequate. She was standing in the administrative corridor when Harlan came around the corner and stopped. He looked at her. She looked at him. He had the appearance of a man who hadn't slept and hadn't been able to hide it as well as she could. There were hollows under his eyes that hadn't been there 2 days ago, and something in his expression had shifted from the flat certainty of a man accustomed to being the most powerful person in any room to something that looked not quite like fear, but like the thing adjacent to fear that happens when a person realizes the room has changed shape around them. "Why are you here?" she said. "I need to talk to Burke." Burke is dealing with an IT security issue. Someone accessed hospital records using his credentials last night. Harlan's face didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. "The cameras on the second floor went down at 3:46, she said. "The physical junction box was accessed from outside the building. Dennis Farrow documented it at 4 a.m., and the documentation is stored off-site." She watched him. "Marcus Delaney has a deposition this morning. His attorney is aware of what happened during his transport. Dr. Adaora's DOH complaint is an active proceeding. Naomi Slade, who is an attorney in Columbus with a federal whistleblower specialty, is currently in a meeting with a DOJ investigator." She said all of this in the same tone she used for medication reconciliation. Clear, sequential, no emphasis. Harlan stared at her. "I want you to understand something," she said. "I am not doing any of this because you threatened my license or my job. Those were real threats with real consequences, and I'm not pretending otherwise." She paused. "I'm doing this because you transported a man with a tension pneumo before he was cleared and he almost died in a police van. And when I documented it and asked for accountability, you tried to use institutional power to erase that documentation and remove me from the hospital. And behind that, behind the Wade Harlan problem, there's a Calvin Harlan problem and a Raymond Stokes problem that has been waiting for the right moment for a long time." She held his gaze. "This is the right moment." Something broke in his face. Not dramatically. Not the way it happened in movies where people collapsed under the weight of revelation. It was quieter than that. A specific kind of fracture that happened when the architecture a person had been relying on revealed itself as temporary. "You don't know what you've started," he said. "I know exactly what I've started," she said. "That's the difference between us." He left. She watched him go and then went to find Priya. Naomi Slade arrived in Calverton at 11:47 a.m. She was smaller than Maya had imagined from 3 years of phone contact, compact, in her mid-50s, with reading glasses pushed up into dark hair going gray at the temples, and the specific economy of movement of a person who had decided long ago not to spend energy on anything that didn't matter. She came with 2 people from her office who stayed in the car, and she met Maya in the hospital's chapel corridor, because the chapel was the one space in Harlan General where it was entirely ordinary to have a quiet private conversation and entirely unusual for administrative staff to walk through. "Westbrook is moving faster than 72 hours, Slade said without preamble. The drive content gave her the Stokes communications, which completes the chain she's had almost since the beginning. She's bringing a parallel case built from the procurement records. She paused. She wants a consolidated filing. Stokes, Calvin Harlan, and everyone in the network adjacent to both of them. When? 36 hours from now, maybe less. Maya exhaled. Harlan was at the hospital this morning. I know. Breck told Voss and Voss told me. Slade looked at her carefully. He's going to go to ground soon. The moment he figures out the drive is gone, he's going to understand the shape of what's happening. He already knows the shape. He just doesn't know the timeline. Which means we need to move the timeline up. Slade pulled out her phone. There's one piece I need from you, the recording device. Maya looked at her. I haven't used it yet. I know, but if there's an opportunity to get Harlan on record, anything about his role in the network, Calvin Harlan, Stokes, Any of it. It strengthens the filing considerably. Slade's voice was even. It's not required. Westbrook has enough without it. But if there's a window, there might be, Maya said. Slade waited. He's going to come back, Maya said. He's been here 3 times in 2 days. Every time something shifts, he comes back to the place where he thinks the problem is. He doesn't know yet that the problem is moved. She thought about Harlan's face in the corridor that morning, the fracture in his expression when she'd listed everything that was already in motion. He's going to want to talk to me again, on his own terms, in a space he thinks he controls. You'd need to give him that space. Yes. Slade looked at her. That puts you in a room with someone who has authorized camera shutdowns and sent consultants and spent 2 days treating you as a problem to be removed. I've been in worse rooms, Maya said. Slade was quiet for a moment. I know you have. Another pause. I'm not asking you to do this. I know. Westbrook has enough. I know that too. Maya looked at the corridor outside the chapel. But I've been carrying that drive for 3 years, and I want this to be complete. I don't want Harlan to be a footnote. I want his own words in the filing. Slade nodded slowly. Then we set it up carefully. Voss and Breck maintain visual on you at all times. The moment the conversation ends, you walk. No extended contact. Agreed. And if he comes in with Mullen or anyone else? I walk before it starts. Maya looked at her. I know the protocol. You wrote half of it, Slade said, with something that was not quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood. Berchtut. Harlan came back at 2:17 p.m. She had been waiting, not in a single place, but in the way she'd learned to wait on deployment, moving through the environment, staying useful, keeping her attention distributed so that it didn't pool into anxiety in any one direction. She changed 2 dressings, reviewed a medication reconciliation, spent 20 minutes with Eleanor Fitch, who was better, whose blood pressure was down, and who told Maya with the specific satisfaction of the elderly, who have outwitted uncertainty that her neighbor had confirmed the dog had been fed. Good, Maya said, and meant it. She was at the 2nd floor nursing station when she got the text from Breck. Harlan, main entrance, alone this time. She went down. He was in the visitors' waiting area near the ER entrance, sitting in one of the plastic chairs with his jacket on his knee and his elbows on his legs. He looked up when she came through the door, and they looked at each other for a moment across the empty waiting room. I need 5 minutes, he said. She sat in the chair across from him. The waiting room was quiet. 2 people at the far end near the vending machines, a child asleep on a chair with his head on his mother's lap. Neither of them close enough to hear anything below a raised voice. The recorder was in her breast pocket. She'd activated it in the elevator. You were in the unit with the Special Operations Medical Team, Harlan said. Not a question. Overseas, 7 years. Yes. And during that time you accessed records related to my brother's command. I had access to records as part of my assignment. Yes. You took those records. I documented what I observed. Yes. He leaned forward slightly. My brother made decisions under circumstances you don't fully understand. The procurement situation was, there were pressures from multiple directions, contractors who weren't performing, supply chains that were compromised. He made decisions that looked... He stopped. That could look wrong in isolation. She watched him. He was reframing the narrative, which meant he was still trying to control something, still operating on the reflex that if he could shape the story, he could shape the outcome. He had people covering for him, she said, including Raymond Stokes. Harlan's jaw tightened. Stokes was a liaison. He didn't cover anything. He co-signed $14 million in contracts to a consulting firm connected to your brother's network while sitting on the review board that should have investigated it, she said. That's in the record. A silence. Whatever you think you have, Harlan said. Whatever file or drive or... He stopped again. His voice had dropped, and in it she could hear the specific register of a man who had stopped performing confidence and was speaking from a different place. My brother is not a criminal. He made compromised decisions in a compromised environment, and people have been building a case against him for years because it's convenient. Because the people who were actually running that procurement network needed someone to hold the bag. Who were those people? she said. He looked at her. The people who were actually running it, she said. If Calvin was the bag holder and not the architect, who were the architects? You know the answer to that. I want to hear it from you. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a siren rose and fell in the middle distance, heading somewhere else. Stokes, he said, and two others. People Calvin trusted because they had rank and institutional cover. He thought he was participating in an approved operation. By the time he understood what it actually was, they had enough on him to make him a willing participant. His voice was carefully flat. That's what the file doesn't say, because the file only has what you saw. It doesn't have what Calvin told me the night before his retirement. She sat very still. He didn't cover up crimes, Harlan said. He was given a choice: carry the cover story or lose everything, including people under his command who would have been implicated along with him. His jaw worked. He chose to carry it. And you've been protecting that choice, she said. Yes. By coming after me. A pause. By trying to remove the person I thought had enough to destroy him. Yes. The communications on that drive include Stokes directing the operation. Your brother's messages are compliant, not directive. A good attorney sees that distinction. She held his gaze. I've seen it since the first time I read them. Harlan went very still. There is a DOJ investigator who has been building towards Stokes from the procurement side for 8 months, she said. What I have completes the chain. Stokes goes down for this, so for what he actually did. The question of what happens to Calvin depends entirely on what Calvin does next. The room was very quiet. He needs to talk to an attorney, she said, not Mullins' people. A real attorney. And he needs to cooperate with the DOJ filing. If his role was what you're describing, that's a very different case than the one that gets built if he stays silent. She paused. But I need you to understand that Stokes goes down regardless. That is going to happen. The only open question is who goes with him. Harlan sat back in his chair. He looked for the first time in 2 days like what he actually was. A man who had been holding something too heavy for too long and had run out of ways to hold it. The nursing board review, he said. I'll be talking to the board, she said. What they decide to do with a complaint that was filed using falsified supporting documentation is their process. But I'll be talking to them. He looked at the floor. Wade. She used his first name deliberately, not warmly but specifically, to mark the shift in what this conversation was. Your brother needs help, not the kind you've been providing. He didn't answer, but he didn't leave either. He sat in the plastic chair in the ER waiting area with his jacket on his knee and the look of a man recalculating every decision he'd made in the last 2 days against a landscape that had changed while he was making them. She stood up. She was 4 steps from the waiting room door when her phone rang. Not a text. An actual call, which almost nobody did anymore, which meant it was something that couldn't wait for a text to be read. The number on the screen was Darnell Price. She answered. Price's voice was tight, not panicked, because Price did not panic, but operating at a register she recognized as maximum urgency. Stokes knows, Price said. He knows the drive is with Slade. He made a call to someone in the Columbus Federal Building 40 minutes ago. Westbrook intercepted it through her existing surveillance warrant. He's not running. He's going on offense. What kind of offense? He's filed an emergency injunction to suppress the evidentiary filing on national security grounds. His attorney submitted it 20 minutes ago to a federal judge in the Southern District. A pause. The judge is Everett Marlowe. She knew that name. She had heard it in the communications on the drive, said not as a central figure, but peripherally. A name that appeared twice in 8 months of messages. A judicial contact. How long does the injunction give him? She said. If Marlowe grants it, the filing is frozen until a review panel convenes. Could be weeks, could be longer. Price's voice was controlled and exact. Westbrook is filing an emergency counter-motion, but she needs something. Any piece of documentation showing Marlowe's connection to the network. To get the counter-motion in front of a different judge. She looked back at the waiting room. Harlan was still in his chair. He was looking at her. She walked back to him. She stood in front of him and she said very quietly, Your brother's messages. The ones Stokes sent directing the operation. Was there ever any communication that mentioned a judicial contact? Harlan looked at her for a long moment. Calvin kept everything, he said. Things I told him to destroy. He kept them because he said if it ever came down to it, he wanted to be able to show what he was actually asked to do. Where are they? Safe deposit box, Calverton First National. I have the key. She held out her hand. He looked at the open hand in front of him. 3 years of a different kind of patience played across his face. The patience of a man who had been holding his brother's story in a bank box and a private grief and a series of increasingly destructive decisions. He reached into his jacket pocket. He put a small brass key in her hand. Her phone was already at her ear. Price, she said, get Slade on the line. Right now. We just got something that changes the Marlowe filing. She was already walking toward the exit when she said it. The key closed in her fist. Price still on the line, and behind her she could hear Wade Harlan get up from the plastic chair with the specific heaviness of a man who had just put something down that he'd been carrying for years and wasn't sure yet what his body felt like without the weight. Slade picked up on the first ring. Marlowe, Maya said. He's in the communications, peripheral, 2 references, 8 months apart. But they're there. And Calvin Harlan has a second set of documents in a safe deposit box at Calverton First National that may show Marlowe more directly. Wade Harlan has cooperated. I have the key. A silence on Slade's end that lasted exactly 3 seconds, which for Naomi Slade was the equivalent of a long pause. Get to that bank, Slade said. Right now, I'm calling Westbrook. Maya was already through the door. The bank opened at 9 and it was now 2:43 in the afternoon, which meant the branch manager was a woman named Patricia Solano, who listened to Maya's explanation with the practiced neutrality of someone who had developed a policy of not reacting visibly to unusual requests, and who made one phone call to confirm that Wade Harlan, as co-signer on the box, had authorized a representative to access it in his presence. And Wade Harlan was standing right there in the bank lobby, in his jacket with his keys in his hand, saying yes, that was correct, in the flat voice of a man for whom the word yes had become the only thing left that made sense. The box contained 3 items. A USB drive, older model, labeled in marker with a date from 7 years ago. A handwritten letter, 4 pages. Calvin Harlan's handwriting, addressed to no one. And a printed photograph, low resolution, the kind taken on a phone in a poorly lit room, showing 4 people at what appeared to be a private dinner. Calvin Harlan was on the left. Raymond Stokes was at the head of the table, one of the other 2 faces she recognized from the communication records. The 4th face, partially turned away from the camera, but identifiable from the jawline and the particular shape of the ear, was Everett Marlowe. She photographed everything with her phone before she touched any of it. Then she called Price and described what she had, and Price said to her in a voice that was doing its best to stay level. The photograph alone changes the motion. Westbrook can use that to establish Marlowe's connection and get the counter-motion in front of Judge Adisa in the Northern District. How fast? She's filing within the hour if you can transmit the image. She transmitted it standing at the bank manager's desk with Patricia Solano diplomatically finding reasons to look at her computer screen in the opposite direction. Then she looked at Calvin Harlan's letter. She didn't read all of it. She read enough, the first 2 pages, which described, in the handwriting of a man who had been composing something in his head for a very long time, the sequence of events that had begun with a logistics contract and ended with a retirement he hadn't chosen. The language was not legal language. It was the language of someone writing to make a record for a reader who might never exist. He described Stokes's directives clearly. He described the moment he understood the operation wasn't sanctioned. He described the choice he'd been given. He had signed it, dated it, 7 years ago. She set it down carefully on the bank manager's desk and looked at Wade Harlan, who was standing near the door watching her read his brother's letter with an expression that was the most unguarded thing she had seen on his face in 2 days. He wrote this the night before he retired, Wade said. I know. He gave me the key and told me not to open the box unless it became necessary. He paused. I spent 2 years deciding when necessary was. You chose wrong, she said. It wasn't cruel, it was just true. And he knew it was true, and treating it as anything else would have been a different kind of cruelty. Yes, he said. Your brother's attorney needs this letter tonight, not tomorrow. She looked at him directly. And Wade, the things you did in the last 2 days, the nursing board complaint, the credential access, the cameras, those have consequences regardless of why you did them. He nodded. I know. A good attorney helps. Cooperation helps more. He nodded again. He looked like a man who had arrived at the far edge of a very long road and found that the view from there was nothing like he'd imagined. She put the photograph back in the box, careful not to disturb the orientation, and called Slade to tell her a courier was needed at Calverton First National within 30 minutes. Then she went back to the hospital. So, the injunction died at 6:44 p.m. She was at the nursing station when Slade texted, Judge Adisa denied Marlowe's injunction. Westbrook's filing is live. 36 hours to federal warrants. She read the text, set her phone down, checked the potassium level on the patient in Bay 5, which was low and needed attention, and ordered a replacement protocol. She did not feel what she had expected to feel. She had imagined, in the abstract, in the quiet moments over 3 years when she'd let herself imagine it at all, that there would be something clean about this. A sense of closure that had a shape to it. A before and an after separated by a clear line. Instead, she felt tired and relieved, and aware in a way she hadn't let herself be for 3 years of exactly how much she had been carrying. She also felt, underneath both of those things, something smaller and harder to name. A specific kind of satisfaction that wasn't triumphant but was solid. The satisfaction of a structure holding, of a thing built carefully over a long time turning out to be what it was built to be. She went and checked Bay 5's potassium. Then she checked Bay 6. Then she went and sat with Eleanor Fitch for 10 minutes because Eleanor had had a difficult afternoon and because the hospital was doing what it always did, generating need in every direction simultaneously, entirely indifferent to the federal legal proceedings happening parallel to it. You look different, Eleanor told her. I'm tired, Maya said. No. Eleanor looked at her with the directness of the very old, who have generally stopped managing other people's comfort about what they observe. You look like something finished. Maya looked at her. Maybe, she said. Raymond Stokes was arrested at his home in Northern Virginia at 7:22 the following morning. She heard about it from Price, who texted a single line. Stokes in custody. 2 others from the network in the same window. Warrants served simultaneously. Judge Everett Marlowe was placed on emergency administrative suspension by the Federal Judicial Oversight Authority 6 hours later, pending a criminal referral that Westbrook's office filed concurrently with the arrest warrants. The suspension notice was public record. By noon, it was in 3 news outlets, described in the careful language of official proceedings. A federal judge in the Southern District had been suspended amid allegations of undisclosed conflicts of interest in connection with a federal procurement fraud investigation. The news didn't say Marlowe's name in connection with a dinner photograph and a dead-end safe deposit box in Calverton, Ohio. It didn't need to. Gareth Mullen was served with a federal subpoena at his registered business address in Delaware on the same morning. Meridian Consulting Associates' assets were frozen pending investigation. The $14 million contract that bore Raymond Stokes' co-signature was flagged as part of a broader procurement review that, Westbrook told Slade, had tentacles reaching into 4 other contracts across 2 federal agencies. These things happened largely in the language of documents and legal filings and official statements, which was how most consequential things actually happened, not in dramatic confrontations in hospital corridors, but in the patient accumulation of records that eventually became too heavy for the structures hiding them to hold. Maya read the updates on her phone between patients. She didn't share them with anyone on the floor except Priya, who read them over her shoulder in the medication room and then stood quietly for a moment. Is it over? Priya asked. The Stokes piece is in motion, Maya said. The legal process takes time. But the part that was a threat to us? Yes, that's over. Priya looked at the floor, then at Maya. Tanaka wants to know if he's in trouble, for the footage. He's not in trouble, Maya said. He's a witness who preserved evidence of a clinical incident. That's exactly what he should have done. Priya nodded. She started to leave, then stopped. I've been thinking about something. What? You said the first morning, When I asked if I could walk away, you said it was still possible. She paused. You meant it. You would have let me. Yes, Maya said. Why did you tell me any of it then? If you were going to give me the option to leave, why tell me enough to make leaving complicated? Maya thought about that. Because you'd already stood in front of Harlan with a chart in your hands, she said. That decision was already made. I didn't make it for you. She paused. I just told you enough so that the decision you'd already made was an informed one. Priya looked at her for a moment, then she went back to work. The Ohio Nursing Board closed the review on the 14th day. The formal letter cited the withdrawal of the initiating complaint, which Wade Harlan's attorney had filed on his behalf as part of a broader cooperation agreement, and the absence of any clinical finding to support the characterization of misconduct described in the original submission. The letter noted that the documentation submitted by Nurse Maya Reeves in connection with the Marcus Delaney case demonstrated clinical judgment consistent with established standards of care, and that the outcome of the case supported the assessment she had made. She read the letter once, put it in a folder, put the folder in her locker. The DOH Patient Safety Review reached its finding 3 weeks after that. The finding was straightforward. The transport of Marcus Delaney prior to clinical clearance constituted a deviation from standard protocol that resulted in a preventable deterioration of the patient's condition. The finding was entered into the hospital's official record. Burke received a formal citation, which he accepted, and which his attorney had advised him to expect as part of a process that, given his subsequent cooperation, would not result in further administrative action. Burke came to find her after the finding was published. He found her in the break room. Different time of day, different light, but the same break room where he'd come to her at 2 a.m. and said the words, "I should have backed you up." He stood in the doorway with the citation in his hand, and she looked up from her coffee, and he said nothing for a moment. "I wanted to say it in person," he said. "I'm sorry for the write-up, for calling you off the patient, for—" He stopped. "For all of it." She looked at him. He was not a villain, Burke. He was a man who had spent years prioritizing the wrong things and had been confronted with the cost of that in a way he couldn't manage around. Those people existed, and what happened to them was usually this. They were sorry, genuinely, and the sorrow didn't undo anything, and they had to live with both of those facts simultaneously. "I know," she said. "That's all?" he said. "What else do you want me to say, Callum?" He thought about it. "Nothing," he said. "I guess nothing." He left. She drank her coffee. It was still bad. Calvin Harlan cooperated. His attorney, a woman named Deb Ferris, who had 30 years of federal defense experience and the specific unflappability of a person who had seen most categories of human mistake, negotiated a proffer agreement that gave Calvin Harlan a framework for cooperation in exchange for consideration on his individual charges. What Calvin provided, the full scope of what Stokes had directed, and how, the documentation of coercive choices, the testimony of a man who had been in the middle of something he'd understood too late, became, in Westbrook's words, the structural center of the government's case. Maya didn't hear this from Calvin directly. She heard it from Wade, who called her once 3 weeks after the bank from a number she almost didn't pick up. "He's talking," Wade said. "He's been talking for 10 days. "I know," she said. "He wanted me to—" A pause. "He wanted to say something to you. He said he'd understand if you didn't want to hear it." She was quiet for a moment. "I'll hear it." Another pause. Then, in the background, a different voice. Older, rougher, with the particular texture of a man who had been living for years inside a decision he couldn't talk about. "I'm sorry," Calvin Harlan said, "for what was done, and for what my brother did trying to protect me from it." A pause. "You held on to it longer than you should have had to. I know that." She held the phone. "I know," she said. And then, because it was true, and because he had earned the truth at considerable cost, "What you gave to Westbrook matters. It's going to matter for a long time." A silence. "Thank you," Calvin said. She hung up and sat for a moment with the phone in her hand, looking at the wall of her apartment. Her actual apartment, the one with the actual address, because she had updated her hospital records 2 weeks ago with her real information for the first time since she'd arrived in Calverton. It was a small thing, but small things had weight. Thomas Voss and the others came back to Calverton 3 weeks after Stokes's arrest, and this time they came in through the front entrance of the hospital like ordinary people, because there was no reason anymore not to. She met them in the lobby: Voss, Breck, Sarah, Price. 4 people she had trusted her life to in a different context, who had driven to Ohio and parked in a structure and stood in a parking lot in the dark and done exactly what she'd asked them to do without asking for explanation she wasn't ready to give. She didn't have a speech prepared. She wasn't going to have one. That wasn't the kind of people any of them were. "You look less tired," Voss said. "I slept," she said. "For how long?" 9 hours, twice. Breck made a face like he was deeply impressed against his will. Sarah smiled, brief and real. "Delaney wants to meet you," Maya said. "He's been discharged, but he left a message with the nursing station. He said," she checked the note she'd written down, "Tell the people who kept me alive I owe them more than I can say." Price shook his head slightly, not dismissively, but with the particular expression of someone for whom gratitude lands differently than most things. "He doesn't owe us anything," Voss said. "I know," Maya said, "but he's going to say it anyway." They stood in the hospital lobby, and it was ordinary. The lobby sounds, the foot traffic, an orderly moving a wheelchair past them toward the elevator. And the 5 of them were ordinary in it, 5 people in civilian clothes talking to each other, nothing that would have drawn a second glance from anyone passing through. She thought, standing there, about the word ordinary. She had spent 8 months constructing an ordinary life on top of something extraordinary she was carrying, and there had been moments when she'd almost convinced herself that the construction was complete, that the seams were invisible, that she had made a clean separation between the person she'd been and the person she was now. But the truth, and she knew this, had known it for years, was that those things didn't separate cleanly. The nurse and the soldier were not 2 different people wearing the same body at different times. She had been one in the field and become the other, and what she'd learned in the field was in the way she assessed a patient's breathing from across a room and ordered a needle before anyone else in the bay had caught up to what was happening. The training didn't live in the past. It lived in the hands. The people who had looked at her in that corridor, Simrior, Harlan, Burke, the residents who'd looked at the floor, Mullen in his dark suit, had seen a charge nurse in plain scrubs and decided she was the least important person in the room. That calculus had been wrong, not because she was secretly extraordinary, but because they had been looking for a category and found one and stopped looking. That was the mistake. The assumption that a person's full dimensions were visible in their job title and their uniform and the institutional context that surrounded them. She had known nurses who had never left the country who could outthink any physician in the building under pressure. She had known people without rank or credential or history who had done things in the moments that mattered that no amount of training fully explained. The woman who had stood in the corridor in front of Harlan the morning this started wasn't standing there because of 7 years of military medicine. She was standing there because of who she was. The training had sharpened something. It hadn't created it. That was the part she wanted people to understand, not the reveal, not the background, not the network of soldiers and attorneys and investigators that had eventually come together to bring something to justice. The part that mattered was the first step, the chart in Priya's shaking hands, the word no said quietly to a large man who expected yes. Those were the moments that determined everything else. Not because they guaranteed a particular outcome, that they didn't, and anyone who told you otherwise had cleaned up the story, but because they were the moments where a person decided what kind of person they were going to be when it was inconvenient and costly and genuinely uncertain. She had been that person once, in a building in a country she couldn't name aloud. She had been that person again in a hospital corridor in Calverton, Ohio, over a man in a plastic chair with his wrists zip-tied and his lungs starting to fail. The context changed. The calculation didn't. Marcus Delaney's deposition went forward on a rescheduled date, 6 weeks after the morning Wade Harlan had pulled him over 3 blocks from the courthouse. His testimony was given. The case proceeded. The employment discrimination suit was filed. The plaintiff's case included Delaney's account. These things were small against the scale of federal procurement fraud and judicial corruption in a network that had operated for 9 years. But they were not nothing. They were the ordinary texture of justice, which was not cinematic and was not swift and did not arrive in a single satisfying moment, but accumulated case by case and record by record into something that eventually had weight. Maya went back to her patients. She went back to Bay 4 through 8 and the bad coffee and Eleanor Fitch, who was discharged the same week with a blood pressure that had finally normalized and a dog that her neighbor had been feeding the entire time. She went back to the morning assessments and the medication reconciliations and the overnight shifts that left her tired in the specific way that good work leaves you tired, used up and still present. Priya stayed. Joel Tanaka finished his rotation. On his last day, he stopped by the nursing station and left a note that said, in handwriting that suggested he'd thought carefully about what to write and then written it quickly anyway. I think I want to be the kind of doctor who does what you did. I don't know yet if I'm that person, but I'm going to try. She read it twice. Put it in her locker next to the nursing board letter. Voss called once a month, which was more frequent than before and less frequent than she'd expected. And the calls were short and practical and contained within them the specific warmth of people who do not need to perform closeness, because the closeness is structural and permanent and was established in circumstances that neither of them would choose to revisit. You staying in Calverton? He asked on the third call. For now, she said. Good place? She thought about it. The break room with the bad coffee, the second-floor stairwell where her phone signal was strongest, the particular sound of Harlan General at 3 a.m. when everything had settled into its nighttime rhythm and the building was doing what it was built to do. It's a real place, she said. That's enough. Voss was quiet for a moment. You know what Price said about you? After everything. What? He said you're the most patient person he's ever worked with. She thought about 3 years in a drive in a locker and 47 messages she'd read so many times she could have recited them. She thought about 8 months of morning shifts and careful silence and a rented apartment with a false address and the specific weight of carrying something that couldn't be put down. I had to be, she said. Yeah, Voss said, but you also chose to be. There's a difference. She sat with that for a moment. There is, she said. Correct out. 3 months after Raymond Stokes was indicted on 7 federal counts, and 2 months after Everett Marlowe was formally referred for criminal prosecution, and 6 weeks after Calvin Harlan's proffer agreement was accepted and the scope of the network became public through court filings, a journalist in Washington wrote a piece about the case. It mentioned, in the 14th paragraph, that the chain of events leading to the investigation's final phase had been set in motion by a patient safety complaint filed at a regional hospital in Ohio. It did not name the hospital. It did not name the nurse. Maya read the piece on her phone in the break room during a 15-minute window between a blood draw and an afternoon assessment. She read all the way to paragraph 14 and the sentence about the hospital in Ohio, and she held her phone for a moment looking at it. Then she put her phone in her pocket and went back to work. There was a patient in Bay 6 who needed her. There was a potassium level that needed watching and a dressing that needed changing, and an elderly man in Bay 8 who had been admitted overnight and was frightened and needed someone to sit with him and explain, slowly, what was happening and what came next. She went to Bay 8 first. She pulled a chair to the bedside, and she sat down and she said, My name is Maya. I'm going to be your nurse tonight. Tell me what you're most worried about, and we'll start there. He looked at her. This man she didn't know, in a bed he hadn't planned to be in a building that had swallowed him out of his ordinary life and hadn't yet given him a reason to trust it. He said, I'm scared. I know, she said. That makes sense. Can I tell you what's going to happen in the next few hours? He nodded. She told him. And the hospital moved around them in its ordinary way. Monitors and PA announcements, and the distant sound of the elevator, and the overnight staff beginning their rounds. And outside the window, the parking lot was full of ordinary cars under ordinary orange light, and somewhere in the building, Marcus Delaney's former room had a new patient in it, and Eleanor Fitch was at home with her dog, and Priya Okafor was at the nursing station doing the work, and 3 years of patience had become a federal case, had become a paragraph in a newspaper article that nobody was going to frame. It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like what came after an ending, which was just the rest of life. Imperfect, unfinished, still requiring you to show up. She had learned in 7 years of doing difficult things in difficult places and 3 years of waiting and 8 months of ordinary mornings that this was the part people didn't tell you about. They told you about the fight, about standing up, about the moment the truth finally surfaced. They didn't tell you about the morning after, when you went back to the work because the work was still there and it still needed doing. She had shown up in that corridor 2 months ago because a man in a plastic chair couldn't breathe right. Everything else had followed from that, not because she had a plan, not because she knew what was going to happen, but because she had decided a long time ago in a very different place what kind of person she was going to be when it cost something. That decision didn't expire. It just kept asking to be made.